Australia's history through music. The first people to inhabit Australia were the Aboriginals. They came here as early as 50,000 years ago. They lived their own way and lived off the land. They told stories of dreaming and they had their own rituals and religion. Early European views of the Aboriginals was that they were uncouth, untrained people. Gradually this view would be changed as the years progressed. In 1770, Captain Cook discovered the east coast of Australia and claimed it to England. Over the years that would follow, many convicts would be sent out, and Australia would be known as a place of grateful dumping people. Generally, these convicts would grow up with their own traditions and their own language. The first fleet arrived in 1788. The early 1800s was the age of exploration in Australia. People like Burke and Wills discovered as much as they could. Legends were born of tough bushmen who strayed through thick and thin, starvation and everything else, persevered to find new land. And now pre-convicts started to come out too, not just the ones that had been in jail, meaning that places like South Australia were great new places for immigration. People like Matthew Flinders discovering all around Australia. And the gold rush in 1851 brought more and more people to Australia, as was eagerly hunted around Eureka, which gave rise to the Australian spirit. There were also heroes and the outlaws like Ned Kelly, who rose up in unfortunate circumstances, fought against the odds, and was unfortunately killed at Melbourne Jail. Legends like this were being born throughout Australia and its own culture was being forged. And now these convicts wanted something to play. So cricket was started, and they needed something to keep them fit in the winter. So a new sport was born, football. Early football matches were primitive, but the rules generally grew and it is now almost a more popular sport than cricket. And the Ashes legend was born. After the first test in 1877, 5 years later in Melbourne, a terrific win for the Australians gave birth to the rise of Australian cricket. Australia went as separate state nations to the Boer War in 1899. By the time some of these soldiers had returned home, Australia was a federated nation. Under the national anthem, God Save the Queen, with the Union Jack in the top left-hand corner, strong ties to Britain were still maintained. A nation that was barely 13 years old was then sent off to war at the Western Front and Gallipoli. A legend was born with the slouch hat and the Anzac name. Australians were a new type of fighter. They were hard, gritty and determined. And while they fought against the odds, they managed to turn Gallipoli from a disaster into a successful retreat. About this time, more national icons started to pop up. Vegemite and Qantas. But it was tough times in the 1930s. After the growing growth of the 1920s, the Depression struck Australia hard. Men were left out of work and many families struggled through this time. It was hard going, but national icons were appearing that was keeping smiles on people's faces, such as Donald George Bradman, who broke many records and taught us a great way to snub up the English. Phar Lap, winning all the records before him and unfortunately being poisoned in America under suspicious reasons. The Sydney Harbour Bridge was also built at this time, connecting the two sides of Sydney, allowing smoother transport and therefore another national icon for Australia. Once again, Australia was sent to war. This time, after the scorching heat of the Africas, they were packed back to Kokoda, and one of the toughest battles ever fought by the Australians was waged. A legend was born, once again. with young men as young as 18 or 17 taking the fight day in, day out. It was heavy artillery, and the atom bomb changed the world forever. And about this time, Australia's first car came out, the very first Holden. A few years later, Ford would be more importing their own cars into Australia, and a rivalry was born that would last to this day. Australia hosted the Olympic Games in 1956 with a bit of our own larrikiness, such as stealing the torch and taking home a few of the events. And once again, Australia went to war, this time to Vietnam, to support the Americans. Many thought this was a controversial way to go, as we weren't heavily tied to them. They weren't respected as the diggers, and there was a long-lasting feud afterwards from the war.
I had to see that man cold turkey, from the ocean to the silver city.
In the late 70s and early 80s, Australia got its own national anthem, Advanced Australia Fair. This would have been around as early as the 1850s, but was officially declared in late 1970s. By 1982, this was officially accepted as our national anthem, and still is today. About this time, after a dark decade of the 80s, cricket and football began to revive. Under the leadership of Alan Border, cricket began a stronghold that would last till this day, with Australia's dominance being well known, such as winning the World Cup here in 1987. And the AFL went national, from VFL to AFL. Now there was Adelaide Crows, West Coast Eagles, Sydney had moved, there was a Brisbane team, and an extra Perth and Adelaide team later in the 90s. Once again, possibly the greatest Olympics ever held was the Sydney 2000, and all thanks to a little girl's letter, Sydney hosted it. Icons such as Cathy Freeman running in her tracksuits to win the 400 metres, and Ian Thorpe were born, more sporting heroes and a great way to show off Australia. And in 2008, Kevin Rudd said sorry for the stolen generation, possibly in closure for many generations of hate and hatred early in the 1900s. So what does the future hold for Australia? My ratings that I've given is politics 2 out of 5. While there is a bit of a shake-up at the moment, I think it will smooth out in the future with more stable leadership. In the scheme of things, we've got a pretty good government, and as long as they can start working for Australia instead of themselves, things should start to work out pretty alright. The environment is 3 out of 5. If we continue to support our resources instead of mining the living daylights out of our earth, we should be alright. If we look after our coast and take eco measures, which is gradually coming in, the world will get better and better. And our economy, in the scheme of things, is also very, very good. 4 out of 5 rating for that. If we can hold off the second wave of mini depression that's coming and keep our bank levels high, things should be alright.